After centuries of war, hunger, and division, Earth finally found peace. The fires of the past cooled, and what rose from the ashes was something new. A united species. The Terran Assembly, forged from former rivals, stood not as rulers, but as caretakers of a fragile, hard-won harmony. Humanity had turned its gaze from the ground to the stars, and for the first time in its history, it reached out not with weapons, but with open hands. The first contact with the galactic community came quietly. A faint transmission picked up on the edge of Neptune's orbit. It was a probe, alien, ancient, and watching. Earth responded not with fear, but with a signal of peace, a simple greeting, sent in hundreds of languages, followed by an invitation. The galaxy listened. Among the many who responded, one name stood out: the Thraxis Dominion. They were old, powerful, and enigmatic. Their message was brief: an offer to meet, to speak, to discuss the possibility of coexistence. The assembly deliberated for hours, then days. The Thraxis were not known for warmth. In fact, very little was known about them at all. But Earth had promised itself it would never repeat the mistakes of its past. Fear would not be its guide. Ambassador Elin Mora was chosen to represent all of humanity. She was calm under pressure, fluent in over 20 languages, and had diffused 2 wars during her career as a diplomat. She had a face that made people listen, and a voice that made people hope. When she stood before the assembly, clad in the deep blue robes of peace, the world watched and believed. Her ship, the Dawncatcher, was fitted with everything she could possibly need, not just to survive, but to impress. Earth's finest engineers had worked around the clock to ensure every inch reflected the best of humanity: elegance, intelligence, compassion. As she boarded, she sent one final message to Earth: "We do not go to needle. We do not go to conquer. We go to speak, and we will be heard." She was escorted by a small fleet, symbolic, unarmed, and respectful. They met the Thraxis delegation at the edge of their territory, in a star system unmarked on any human chart. The Thraxis ship was like nothing Earth had ever seen: black, angular, alive in a way that seemed to defy physics. The Dawncatcher was invited aboard. Then the escort ships were told to wait. Standard protocol, the aliens explained. Discussions would be private. The escort fleet waited. 1 day, 2, 5, then a week. No word, no signal, no return. At first, Earth assumed delays, cultural misunderstandings, translation errors. Then the Dawncatcher's beacon went silent. The Terran Assembly sent requests: please, warnings. Still, nothing came. Until the package arrived. It hovered just outside the lunar defense perimeter. A perfect silver cube, smooth and silent. Inside was her hand. Ambassador Elin Mora had made contact. Humanity had been heard, and something had answered. The package arrived without warning, drifting silently through the cold of space, its edges sharp, its surface flawless. It seemed almost unnatural, as though it had been made by hands unfamiliar with human forms. Earth's communications network buzzed with activity as the silver cube appeared on every screen. The initial reaction was one of confusion, an unmarked, unidentified object approaching Earth from deep space. But the confusion turned to dread when it stopped just outside the perimeter of Luna's defense grid. The message was clear. It had come for Earth, and it was waiting. The Terran Assembly ordered an immediate retrieval. A specially designed drone approached the object, floating in perfect stillness, and gently pulled it aboard a secured platform. The silence that followed seemed louder than the approaching storm. The world's leaders gathered in tense anticipation, ready to witness what came next. The cube was brought to a secure facility in Earth's capital, where a carefully chosen team of experts was waiting. They had prepared for this moment for months, but nothing could have prepared them for what was inside. As the top of the cube slid open, the contents were revealed. Ambassador Elin Mora's hand. Preserved in stasis, it was unmistakably hers, pale, delicate, and lifelike in its stillness. A chill swept through the room. There was no note, no message, only the gruesome evidence of what had happened. The hand was neatly severed at the wrist, as though someone had taken great care to remove it without unnecessary damage. It was wrapped in a protective casing that kept it cold, its surface unmarred except for the faint, pale blue veins that pulsed with an eerie mechanical rhythm. Her fingers were curled slightly, as though she had been reaching out when the cut was made. The world held its breath. No one spoke. The implications were far too horrifying to even consider. The ambassador had been alive when this happened. The Assembly's fears, once theoretical, now had a brutal face. The Thoraxes, with their strange ways, had not greeted humanity with the peace they had promised. They had used their ambassador as a messenger of something else, a declaration that humanity was not welcome. As news of the package spread across Earth, the terror of the unknown grew. But it wasn't just fear that took hold. Anger began to stir in the hearts of people from all corners of the world. Earth had extended its hand, and it had been severed in return. There was no question anymore. The Thoraxes had made their choice. The world's leaders met in emergency session. Some argued for restraint, for diplomacy, for sending a team to investigate. But the people spoke with one voice. There would be no more negotiation. The ambassador's sacrifice would not be in vain. The Terran Assembly passed the Dauntless Doctrine, a policy that would shift humanity's focus from diplomacy to defense. The age of peace was over. The age of retribution was beginning. And it was just the beginning. The reaction was swift and overwhelming. News of the ambassador's gruesome return spread across the globe like wildfire. What had been a moment of optimism for humanity, the hopeful outreach to the stars, had been reduced to a nightmare. The world that had once lived in fragile peace found itself united in an unexpected way, through the cold, shared certainty that they would never be weak again. Governments that had once bickered over borders and resources now closed ranks. Former rivals, once bitter enemies on Earth, now stood side by side. The anger that rose from the loss of Elon Mora burned hot, and with it came a resolve that could not be ignored. The Terran Assembly, the global body that governed Earth's affairs, enacted the Dauntless Doctrine in an emergency session. Diplomacy, once the cornerstone of Earth's foreign policy, was placed on indefinite hold. A new path forward would not be forged with words. It would be forged with action. At first, the leaders hesitated. The ambassador had been a symbol of humanity's commitment to peace. To turn away from that commitment, to prepare for war, felt like a betrayal of everything they had worked for. But then they remembered what the Thoraxes had done. They had not come to negotiate. They had come to destroy any hope of unity. The world's response would be as decisive as it was unforgiving. The Terran Assembly's military advisors worked quickly, pulling together the finest minds humanity had to offer. A fleet began to take shape, a fleet built not only for war, but for survival. Each ship was designed with the lessons learned from Earth's history, ingenuity, adaptation, and resilience. The warships were modular, flexible, able to adapt to any environment or threat. They would not just respond to the Thoraxes. They would counter every tactic the Dominion might use. Every human pilot, every soldier would carry with them not just weapons, but the spirit of an entire species that had been tested and had endured. Earth's factories, once used for scientific exploration and civilian goods, now turned to the production of war machines. The vast underground bunkers that had once been designed for planetary defense were retrofitted and expanded. On Mars, the first of the Vanguard fleet ships were launched into space, sleek, armored, and brimming with cutting-edge technology. Earth was no longer a planet of peace. It was a planet that would defend its right to survive. While the fleet was being assembled, the Terran Assembly's leaders addressed the people. They promised no victory without a fight, but also no vengeance without purpose. This was not a crusade of hate. This was a declaration of justice. The day the Vanguard fleet left Earth's orbit, humanity stood together as one, looking up at the sky. The stars no longer seemed distant. They felt close, tangible, as though they could finally be reached. And this time, humanity wasn't reaching with a hand extended in peace. This time, humanity was reaching with fists clenched in defiance. The Thraxis would learn. Earth had been broken, but it was not beaten. In the aftermath of the first confrontation, the Terran Assembly moved swiftly to uncover the truth behind the Thraxis' actions. Human intelligence operations were put into overdrive. Spies infiltrated the outer colonies of the Dominion. Diplomatic channels that had been established with the Thraxis, now severed, were repurposed for covert intelligence. The message was clear. The Thraxis would not get away with this. Earth needed to understand exactly what had happened to Ambassador Ilan Mora, and why. Within weeks, a breakthrough came. A rogue Thraxis general, a high-ranking defector from the Dominion, contacted Earth with a message encrypted in the same stasis tech used to preserve Mora's hand. The message was brief, yet the implications were staggering. The Thraxis, it turned out, had not intended to engage in diplomacy at all. The entire interaction had been a test, one that Ilan Mora had failed, along with all of humanity. The Thraxis Dominion followed a brutal tradition, one older than their empire itself. The practice was known as the Adherin Rite, a trial by suffering. When new species were discovered, the Dominion would force them to submit, to prove their worthiness by enduring unimaginable cruelty. Those that crumbled were absorbed into the Dominion, their entire culture erased in the process. Those that resisted were considered worthy adversaries, worthy of annihilation or, in rare cases, forced cooperation. It became horrifyingly clear the Thraxis had never intended peace. Ambassador Mora, in her effort to negotiate and build an alliance, had unknowingly stepped into their dark ritual. The delivery of her dismembered body parts was not an accident. It was the message. The Thraxis expected humanity to bow, to surrender, or to fall apart under the pressure. The dismemberment was part of their testing. The alien forces had wanted to see if humanity's resolve could be broken. The more the Terran Assembly learned, the more the depth of their fury grew. The Thraxis had miscalculated in assuming that humans would fold. What they didn't understand, what no alien empire could possibly grasp, was that humans were not built to surrender. Earth had been knocked down more times than anyone could count, and each time it had gotten back up stronger. Each trial had forged something unbreakable in the human spirit. As the last piece of the ambassador was returned, her eyes, still open, frozen in their final defiant stare, the leaders of Earth came to a grim consensus. This would not go unanswered. Humanity would not only fight to avenge Ilan Mora's death, they would fight to redefine the very meaning of power in the galaxy. They would show the Thraxis what happens when you mistake compassion for weakness. And they would do it without mercy. The construction of the Vanguard fleet had begun in earnest, but this was no ordinary military force. Earth had learned quickly from the intelligence gathered about the Thraxis Dominion. If the Dominion valued strength and brutality, humanity would show them something else: adaptability, resourcefulness, and unyielding determination. The Vanguard fleet was not a collection of just soldiers and warships. It was a symbol, a declaration of what humanity had become. The ships were sleek, modular, and unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each vessel was a masterpiece of human engineering, designed for both battle and survival in deep space. They were equipped with cutting-edge technology that Earth scientists had developed in secret: shields that adapted to energy weaponry, hulls that could reconfigure based on battlefield conditions, and AI systems that could predict enemy tactics with startling accuracy. The first of the Vanguard fleet's ships, the Aegis, was launched from the lunar docks. Its surface shimmered in the light of Sol, its sleek form casting a long shadow over the base. It was the first of many, but it was the most important. The Aegis was a symbol of humanity's resolve, and the crew aboard it embodied the new spirit of the human race. Lieutenant Commander Ava Carson was among those chosen to lead the fleet. She was a seasoned pilot and strategist, known for her quick thinking and unparalleled ability to adapt to changing circumstances. When the call came to join the Vanguard fleet, she knew the stakes were higher than ever. This wasn't just about military engagement, it was about survival. Humanity had to show the Thraxis that it could not be defeated by brute force alone. As more ships were launched, the fleet began to take shape. Each ship was unique, designed by different engineers and captains, but united by one common purpose. The crew was a mix of military veterans, scientists, engineers, and diplomats, all with a singular goal: to protect Earth and ensure that the tragedy of Elon Mora's death would not be in vain. On Earth, the streets were filled with people who had watched their world go from one of fragile peace to a mobilized war machine. It wasn't just soldiers who boarded the ships. People from every corner of the planet volunteered to serve. The desire for justice was universal. The ambassadors who had once represented Earth in talks now stood in uniform, preparing for the battles ahead. Every human, whether in uniform or civilian life, had a role to play. As the Vanguard fleet entered the outer reaches of the solar system, the fleet's AI systems detected a new signal. It was faint but unmistakable. The Thraxis had noticed Earth's preparations, and now they were watching. But humanity was no longer intimidated. They had faced the unknown before, and always emerged victorious. The Aegis led the fleet into the void, its engines burning brighter than ever. It was not just a ship, it was the very soul of humanity's response to the galaxy's cruel judgment. And humanity would make sure the Thraxis remembered who they were up against. The Vanguard fleet entered Thraxis space with a singular purpose: to show the Dominion the true meaning of defiance. The first few encounters were tactical probes, small skirmishes designed to test the Thraxis response. It wasn't long before the fleet learned that the Dominion's tactics were as brutal as they were predictable. Their military doctrine relied on overwhelming force, swarming with massive warships designed to crush anything in their path. But humanity had learned to adapt, and it did so with terrifying efficiency. The Aegis led the charge into the first major Thraxis system, its sleek form cutting through the darkness of space. The Thraxis had stationed a formidable blockade in the system's orbit, a line of ships designed to trap any incoming vessels. The humans had expected this. They had anticipated the Dominion's overconfidence. Instead of charging in with brute force, Commander Carson ordered the fleet to split into smaller, more agile groups. The ships moved like predators in the wild, separating, flanking, then striking with surgical precision. The Thraxis, for all their military might, were unprepared for this tactic. Their fleet formations, based on overwhelming numbers and sheer firepower, could not keep up with the speed and unpredictability of the Vanguard fleet. The first clash was violent. A wave of energy blasts erupted from the Thraxis warships, but the humans had anticipated it. The Aegis's adaptive shields absorbed the blasts, shifting frequencies and deflecting incoming fire. At the same time, smaller ships darted in and out of the fray, launching precise strikes that disabled Thraxis engines and crippled their weapon systems. It wasn't just about firepower. It was about intelligence. Every move the humans made was calculated. Every action had a purpose. Within hours, the Thraxis blockade was in disarray. The humans had inflicted crippling damage, but they had done so without excessive loss. The Dominion's ships, though large and intimidating, couldn't keep pace with the human fleet's maneuverability. The battle was a decisive victory for Earth, but it was only the beginning. The Thraxis retaliated swiftly, launching reinforcements from nearby systems. The Vanguard fleet, however, had learned their lesson. They didn't fight out of anger or hate, but out of necessity. Their tactics were based on one simple truth: they could not afford to lose. Earth's forces, though smaller in number, used speed and strategy to disrupt the enemy's every move. By the time the Thraxis realized what was happening, it was too late. The Dominion had underestimated humanity, and they were paying the price. The human forces didn't just win. They adapted faster than the Thraxis could evolve. Earth's ships were like shadows, slipping through the gaps in the Dominion's defenses, striking where it hurt most. And all the while, the message was clear: humanity would not be broken. They would fight, not out of vengeance, but to prove that peace was not a weakness. It was their strength. The Thraxis had hoped to break Earth's spirit. Instead, they had forged it into something unyielding. With each battle, the Dominion's grip on their galaxy began to loosen, and the humans' resolve only grew stronger. As the Vanguard fleet pressed deeper into Thraxis space, the Dominion's response became more desperate. No longer relying on brute force alone, the Thraxis began deploying specialized weapons, devices designed not to cripple, but to utterly destroy. The stakes were rising. For the first time in centuries, the threat of total annihilation loomed over humanity. The Dominion, once the galaxy's hidden power, now revealed the true extent of their might. The Thraxis unleashed the first of their new weapons on a human convoy traveling through an uncharted nebula. It was a ship unlike any Earth had seen, dark, massive, and brimming with energy far beyond conventional weaponry. The Aegis had never faced anything like it. The Dominion ship's weaponry tore through the human convoy like a hot knife through butter. But it wasn't just its firepower that shocked humanity. It was the weapon's sheer destructive potential. It was capable of wiping entire planets from existence in a single blast. The Thraxis had entered a new phase of their war, one that sought not just victory, but extermination. Commander Carson received the distress signal moments before the attack. Her heart sank as she saw the remains of the convoy. Ships broken apart, debris scattered across the nebula like a trail of broken promises. The Aegis had been too far out to prevent the attack, but it would not be too far to strike back. This was no longer about tactical superiority. This was about survival. The humans realized that they were fighting not just for retribution, but for their very existence. The Dominion had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt and survive. Earth had never fought just for territory or resources. It fought to live, to thrive, and to protect everything it held dear. Now, the stakes were not just about defeating an enemy. It was about ensuring that humanity would not be wiped from the galaxy. The Vanguard fleet began a relentless campaign to track down and neutralize the Thraxis weapon. Earth's engineers worked in overdrive, developing countermeasures that could negate the Dominion's new technology. Every ship in the fleet became a weapon of resistance, each crew member pushed to their limits, driven by the fear that, if they failed, humanity might cease to exist. The battle came to a head at the heart of Thraxis space, where the Dominion had constructed a massive stronghold. It was their final line of defense, a heavily fortified station, surrounded by an armada of ships. The humans, guided by Carson's leadership and the intelligence gathered by Earth's spies, launched an all-out assault. They couldn't afford to hesitate. Every moment counted. The fate of humanity rested on the outcome of this final confrontation. As the Vanguard fleet closed in on the Thraxis stronghold, the tension was palpable. The Dominion ships moved into position, ready to unleash their full destructive force. But Commander Carson wasn't intimidated. She had faced the worst, and she knew that humanity's strength wasn't in their weapons. It was in their unyielding will to survive. This would be their defining moment. The final confrontation between the Vanguard fleet and the Thraxis Dominion took place in the heart of their empire, at the gates of their last bastion. The massive stronghold loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress surrounded by an armada of battle-hardened ships. Earth's fleet was small by comparison, but it was determined, and it was relentless. Commander Carson's voice rang out over the comms, calm but fierce, as the battle began. Remember why we fight. This is for humanity. This is for our future. The first wave of human ships moved forward, weaving through the dense line of Thraxis warships. The Thraxis retaliated immediately, launching volleys of plasma fire that turned space around them into a hellscape of destruction. But the human fleet had learned from every battle before. Their ships were more than just vessels. They were living things, responding to every shift in the battle, every change in tactics. The Aegis led the charge, its shields absorbing blow after blow, while smaller ships flanked the enemy, striking their engines and disabling critical systems. The Thraxis retaliated with their ultimate weapon, the dark, planet-killing ship that had destroyed the human convoy earlier. It emerged from the heart of the Dominion's stronghold, its black hull gleaming ominously in the starry void. A flash of energy lit up space as it charged its devastating weapon. The crew of the Aegis watched in horror as the weapon powered up. If it fired, the consequences would be catastrophic. But Carson had a plan. With surgical precision, she ordered the fleet to break off and take evasive action, knowing that their only hope lay in disabling the weapon before it could fire. The human ships swarmed the massive ship, darting in and out of range, striking at the vulnerable points that had been identified by Earth's intelligence. The Thraxis ships, though superior in size and firepower, were unable to match the speed and unpredictability of their enemies. The Aegis took the lead. Carson and her crew fought tirelessly, racing against the clock as the planet-killer weapon continued to charge. Then, with a final, well-timed strike, the Aegis's attack ship disabled the weapon's core. The energy buildup collapsed, and the massive ship's power flickered and died. The Dominion's greatest weapon was neutralized. But the victory came at a cost. The Vanguard fleet had lost several ships in the battle, their crews sacrificed in a final act of defiance against the Dominion. The Thraxis stronghold, once considered impenetrable, had been breached, but the price of their success was steep. In the aftermath, as the remaining Thraxis ships withdrew, a new chapter for humanity began. Earth stood victorious, its resolve proven beyond measure. They had not only defended their home, they had sent a message to the galaxy. Humanity was not to be underestimated. As Commander Carson gazed out at the wreckage of the Thraxis stronghold, she knew that peace would never come easy. But for the first time in history, humanity had earned its place among the stars. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, Earth would face them together, with the unbreakable spirit that had carried them this far. The war was over, but humanity's story was just beginning.